Ladies and gentlemen, there he is, Dennis Bernstein, and he's got his photos behind him.
Oh
He
yeah.
he is a jack of all trades in a good way because he's talented and does a lot of things very, very well. I'm going to try to list these off right now. You're
Okay,
with
Rob.
we're with our friend Pags at the fourth period.
Correct.
You do a show on the weekend and also fill in on a regular basis on Sirius XM, my old
That
stomping ground.
that's correct. Yes.
You have your own LA Kings podcast with John Hoven,
Correct. Right.
correct? And you're a bon vivant and a world traveler.
Yeah, I'm a world traveler. Yeah.
There
It's
you go.
actually we're going we almost went to Prague, but we're going to go to Quebec City because the Kings don't play preseason games because the crypto.com arena is being renovated. So we had a choice if we're going to Prague or Quebec City. That's not a dilemma at all. So we're going to stay in
No.
North America, but maybe in November when they go to Tampere, Finland.
Yep.
We've been to Helsinki before, but we love the Global Series. But I think it's time at least one season to stay home, and I'm sure my wife will love that.
Yeah. Well, Prague's a lot of fun. I know
Oh,
that
it is. I've been
firsthand.
there
And
a long time ago. Great
yeah,
city. It
no.
should be a great series as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, you just brought up the rink. Seven straight on the
Yep.
road to start the regular season. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good test.
Business. It's business. It's a business. So it's a business. It's not
Yeah.
just a sport, right? And there's major renovations going on at Crypto.com Arena, which I believe will also occur next summer. So the Kings won't play any preseason games next summer, probably start on the road again. But this is a bear. There's been a lot of changes to the LA Kings. And of course, the way they're going to spin it is, well, this gives an opportunity for the team to go away for 2.5 weeks and bond because they are going to play the final two preseason games in Quebec City against the
Yeah.
Panthers and the Bruins, stay
Yeah.
east and open up against Buffalo, who they have such a terrible time playing in Buffalo. So it almost looks like a schedule L. But yeah, it's going to be difficult. They're going to be in Buffalo. They're going to be in Boston. They hit Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto at the end of the trip. So and Vegas, I believe, as well. So they don't open until October 24th at home against Macklin Celebrini and the San Jose Sharks. But they'll look at it as an opportunity for the new guys in the team to get on the road with the team and bond.
Yeah. They always use the bonding thing as like the, oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
always.
And also, Jim Hiller, the coach, is not going to want to say, "Oh, what would be good? 5-2 would be a dream. 4-3
Yeah.
would be great. 3-4 would be disappointed. Anything less than that, we're in trouble." He's not going to say
Sure.
that. That's kind of it's kind of the way it is. I mean, if you come off that trip 4-3, you're
Oh,
over.
that's you're golden. They'd sign for that. I think they even signed for like 500, Rob. Like if they were 3-3-1 coming back,
Yeah.
I think they would be fine with 7 points in 7 games because that is a bear to start with respect to the changes they've made on the team.
I call it the magical mystery team because East Coast bias, maybe, or traditional
Hmm.
market bias, or maybe I'm just around Canadian media too much. But every year it's the same thing. Oh, who are we picking out west? Who do we always forget? The LA Kings. Who's been in the playoffs
Right.
the last 3 years? The LA Kings.
Hmm.
99 points, 104 points, 99 points. They had the identical record last year that they had 3 seasons ago
Yep.
when they
Hmm.
made the postseason. Something that the Vancouver Canucks can't say, something that the Seattle Kraken obviously can't say. They're just
Right.
there all the time. They're always in contention, and they always end up making the playoffs. At least in the last 3 years, they haven't won a playoff round in their last 5 visits to the post.
Hmm. Correct.
But man, let's start right here. 3 in a row in the postseason, coming out of kind of the COVID doldrums. How did they
Hmm.
just turn it around after 21 in terms of? I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, they smartly, you know, analyzed that the team was getting older. It was time to trade up veterans like Jeff Carter, Tyler Toffoli, and they rebuilt. They still had the core. They still had Anze Kopitar. They still had Drew Doughty. They still had a solid core there. A guy like Mikey Anderson as well, who's now signed long term. So,
Yeah.
and then they drafted well, and they made some good moves in free agency. I think the one major one that people still undersell is Phil Donnell. He really stabilized the center position behind Anze Kopitar. And they came in first year, scored 27 goals. That's way over for Phil. You figure by maybe 17, 50 points for Phil. I think the most important thing why they bounced back, Todd McClellan came in, structure, defense. It's carried over. It hasn't been good enough in the playoffs. It wasn't good enough for regular season. And so Todd did a lot of great things, got this team back into contention. But as you mentioned, they haven't won a playoff round since they won the Stanley Cup in 2014. and this is Rob Blake's, I believe, eighth season starting. We shouldn't be asking Rob at this point when's your team is going to win a playoff round. It should have happened by now, and it's critical that they have some success in the postseason. A lot of people, Rob, after the Kings got eliminated in 5 against Edmonton, and it got progressively worse against them in the playoffs. First year they made the playoffs, lost in 7 in a very tough game. Connor McDavid played 27 minutes. They lost in 6 the previous year. And they lost in 5 last year. So a lot of people speculated that Rob Blake maybe wouldn't be the general manager this year. And but what I know of the management and ownership, it's not a very reactionary ownership. Like, Phil Ann shoots his hands off. He's recluse. He's up in Denver. He's not a hands-on guy. He's not like Aquilini, who we'd see in the stands every night or on social media. So they're very patient. Building, they still draw well. They still did make the playoffs. And if they do make the playoffs, I checked. If they were to make the playoffs this season, Rob, that would be 4 seasons in a row. There's only 8 teams that potentially could make the playoffs 4 seasons in a row. It's hard to do. But again, when you had Stanley Cups and you still have a couple of the guys who were on those Stanley Cup teams and you're not winning rounds, that's troublesome. So it's really incumbent upon, I think, most importantly, Rob Blake to get his team to get some playoff success. Jim Hiller's signed on, I believe, for 3 years, so he's kind of in solid. But it's going to be another interesting season because this is a solid team. Is it a Stanley Cup contender? When I look at the roster, I can't say that. But should they be 95 to 100 points again? They really should be.
They should be. And I have some concepts as to why they keep pulling this off. And again, part of it's just people being overlooked. Anze Kopitar, Ponce de Leon. Ponce de Leon is the founder. Yeah. He's 37 years old. The kids are going to have to Google Ponce de Leon. Quinton Byfield is starting to live up. The 2022 second overall pick is coming into his own. And you know what? That 6.2, that might end up like a bar.
It should be.
Right?
Yeah.
Here in the next couple of years. For whoever, for whatever reason, they plug in it in net just seems to work out. Now it's Darcy Kuemper. And then probably because Kempe and Fiala are 2 of the more underrated players in the National Hockey League. And again, that comes down to where they play.
Yeah. And going back to the structure, again, this team with Drew Doughty, who still is great, but is not at the level of, let's say, Quinn Hughes or Cale Makar or Roman Josi. I think they were 2nd overall or 3rd overall goals against and 2nd penalty kill. When you have that type of structure and that kind of defensive performance, you're going to make the playoffs. They were an average offensive team, and that's what really hurt them. Well, what hurt them in the postseason, Rob, is that they had a really effective penalty kill against 31 of 32 teams. Unfortunately, the 32nd team is the one they've played in the playoffs the last 3 seasons, and they couldn't figure out a way. So, yeah, Darcy Kuemper for Cam Talbot. Look, Cam's numbers were really good. He bounced back because he was healthy, non-15. The thing with Darcy, though, if you look at goals above expected, if you go to Money Puck, and you look at Darcy Kemper's year last season, he was 75th out of, I think, 99 goalies. And so that wasn't good with respect to expected goals. And he only played 33 games. Now, if he's going to be the starter over David Rittich, he's going to have to probably play, almost maybe 50, 60% more games, maybe in the 50s. Yeah. And that might be a challenge for him. Now, he's still the same guy who won a couple of years ago in Colorado. The team in front of him in Washington wasn't great. He didn't have great numbers, but Charlie Lincoln did. So the question is, can they get about the same performance they got from Cam that they'll get from Darcy? The one thing about this team now, even though, look, here's the thing. I get it. They traded Dubois, right? When you're in the Game 5 of an elimination game and a guy's making $8.5 million and he's playing the 4th line center, like there's a problem. And they eradicated the problem. They got back Camper. They got out from under the contract. And Rob, the one thing you can't tell me in this league is that no contract's untradeable. Because if I told you this time last year the Kings would trade Dubois, not retain any money, and goaltender back, you would tell me I was day drinking before I came on your show. And that's not the case. So any contract's tradable, Rob. But here's the thing. Now it winds up that your trade was, Velarde, Iafallo, Kupari, and a 2nd-round pick for Darcy Kuemper. You would never make that trade, right? So at the end of it, sure, he got from under. There's now cap space. Quinton Byfield's going to go to center, so they have coverage there. But it was not a great trade. And with respect to Kuemper, can he bounce back? And not be the guy who was in Colorado because they had a great team around him, but give them 910 to 915 save percentage, bounce back and be a better goaltender. They can, again, they should be in that 95 to 100-point range.
Byfield, just touch on him a little bit here in terms of what you've seen in terms of that emergence that we're referring to.
Yeah, he had to see. Look, he hasn't had a 100-point season like Tim Stützle does. did in Ottawa, but Tim took a step backwards as well. So that comparison at first wasn't fair because Stützle was, over the top with respect to his scoring, but now it's kind of equalized. And, for bigger guys like Byfield, sometimes, Rob, it takes time to
Yeah.
develop. Got Slavkovsky in Montreal, same thing. People thought he was a bust up there. He had a really nice season. Same thing with Q. He had 20 goals, I think 35 assists or 30 assists, 50-point guy.
Yeah.
When we asked him last season about his future, he said, look, I'm a center. So even before they traded Dubois, while he was very effective with Kempe and Kopitar last year as the first line, like now he gets the opportunity to drive his line. He probably will start with Fiala and maybe Warren Fogle as his wings, but they expect more than 20 goals. And if you look at his goal production last season, Rob, it really cooled off in the second half in the playoffs. He should have scored more than the 20 that he did. Hopefully now that he's driving a line with Kopitar and Deno giving coverage, at least on the defensive side, when it's 2 minutes to go in a game, he's not necessarily going to have to worry about taking a face-off in the defensive zone. So he'll have to work on his going back to center, and the responsibilities are in the middle. But you have to expect more from this player. The progression's there. He's going to be playing center with a very creative player in Fiala, hopefully, although Fiala gets moved around the lineup. So you have to expect more from it, and they will need more if they are going to stay in the top 8 and have some success in the playoffs.
By the way, the Jim Hill, you circle back to what you first brought up, Todd McClellan, and bringing structure to the whole thing and turning the whole thing around. And then boom, he's 23-15 when he gets fired. Jim Hiller takes over. What seamless transition? I mean, how do we view Jim compared to
different personalities? Jim is more relaxed, has more of a sense of humor, although I love Todd, and Todd did a lot of great things for me in his 4.5 years here. But Todd was just wound up, was wound up tight and was more stubborn than Jim. Now, Jim is not afraid to change. When the Kings were going through that bad streak, I think it was, they lost 14 out of 17, which ultimately cost Todd his job. He didn't really change much because he believed so much in his team. It's not have to change that. We'll come out of this fuck. We'll get there. And they never got there. And at some point in time, when you have that much losing and you're supposed to make the playoffs and the team's going in the wrong direction, they won a game before the last All-Star break in Nashville, which you had no right winning. Like they got outshot 41-17. I think that was the final straw. And then during the break, Rob decided to go with Jim Hiller. Yeah, there's been a seamless transition, but now Jim's the guy, and he is the full-time guy. He did step those 5 feet across where it's different being an assistant coach to a head coach last season, and the players liked him, and they responded. I think they were 20-12-1, and when he was behind the bench. So he helped right the ship, and now he's going to change some things, particularly the beloved, and I say that in quotes, the 1-3-1 that everybody else in the league hates, but was very effective by the Kings. They're going to get away from that passive 1-3-1. They're going to go to a 1-2-2 defensively, and he wants his forwards to be more participatory in play and have more speed. So you might see a different style of LA Kings, the ones that even though it got them to the playoffs 3 years in a row and got them back into contention, just the feelings around the team and even from the players, like the end of last season, they were kind of a little tired of the 1-3-1. So I think they're going to be a little refreshed playing in the system. And for Hiller, he's thinking hopefully it creates more offense because they were like middle of the pack. They were like 16th, I think, in goal scoring last year.
Yeah. You reminded me of something else too, or Todd, when he got fired, I swear I was walking and talking with him at the rink at post game in Seattle. And I think it was probably 10 days later, if that. It was right around the time he got fired. I was like, zoinks. It was just one of those.
Yeah, it's tough to see. I really, really like Todd. Respect the guy, really knowledgeable guy. He could have maybe been the coach in Columbus if they had found out the way, because he's still getting paid by the Kings this season. Contractually, who was going to pay what part of the salary? That couldn't come to fruition. I assume he's going to coach at some point in the NHL.
Yeah.
And it could be with a younger team because he's good at building structure. And with veteran teams, he's taken teams, pretty deep in the playoffs. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I wish Todd well. He's been great to me in Los Angeles at this time. And I assume he'll be in the NHL at some point again.
Would the number one concern for this team that everyone always overlooks be D depth?
Yeah, because you have your top 4. The question is, I assume that's going to be Jordan Spence playing with Vladislav Gavrikov on the second pair, although they expect big things from Brandon Clark. And he's a 5th overall pick a couple of years ago. He's an exciting player. If you watch his first NHL goal in Boston in overtime when he came out of the penalty box after committing a penalty, he's an exciting player. They expect a lot from him. The depth, it's there. But the question is with Gavrikov, for instance, Gavrikov's on a walk year of his contract. Is he going to stay in LA? Like, he's probably going to be a $6 million a year defenseman. Not sure they can swallow that because he doesn't create that much offense. So he's a vital part of this top four. So the top four is fine because either Spence, who played on the third pair with Andreas England last season, will probably be promoted. He needs to play maybe more than the 14 minutes a night that he did. The bottom pair is a question mark. They brought in Joel Edmondson, and people head for the exits when they saw that contract signed, but they needed some toughness. That's why he's there. That's why Tanner Janot's there. And yeah, if he's playing on the third pair, you don't want a guy making 3.5 plus on the third pair, but that's where they are right now. They could afford to do it. They needed the physicality. They needed more size on defense because the convention outside the organization and eventually inside the organization, the King gets pushed around. They got pushed around by the Edmonton Oilers in the playoffs. They got a little bit intimidated. So with respect to Janot, who's a tough guy up front, and Edmonton gives more size. So I think there's enough depth there. They also have Kyle Burrows, who unfortunately hit Arthur Kaliev in practice, the second day of practice at training camp, and Arthur sustained a clavicle injury. It's going to have him out months. So there's some NHL experience. Ingles is still there. So is it a great defense? No, but the system was really good. And Drew Doughty's still going to play 25 minutes. And I think Mikey Anderson is as tough a defender as there is in the league, even though he's not the biggest guy in the world. So there's some depth there, Rob. It's not the most gifted offensive defense in the league, and they're going to maybe try to get guys more involved in the play. But when you move out Matt Roy, he went to Detroit in free agency, and if it's Brent Clark's going to be the guy, you're going to get a lot more offense from them. So they hopefully to score more. There's enough defense there, but is it, a top 5 defensive unit in the NHL? I wouldn't call them that, even though statistically they were a very good defense last year.
Yeah. Clark's the kid, 21. He's a righty, and Kyle Burrows is the other righty. If they go with the older guy who's kind of a feisty, undersized.
Yep.
But whichever guy plugs in, they got 3 lefties, 3 righties, so everybody's playing on their natural side.
Yeah.
What can we say about the Dennis Bernstein Anze Kopitar Appreciation Society?
Yeah, he's become a friend over the years. So he's a great guy. He's going, he'll get 75, 80 points this season. He's no signs of slowing down. Now he is on a lower contract this season. So he's making poor man wages at 7 million, but he's been a guy who you keep waiting for the regression, Rob, and it just doesn't happen. He's going to play 19 minutes a night, 20 minutes a night. Maybe with Quinton Byfield emerging as a center, you might pare that down to maybe 17 or 18 minutes. Still a stellar defensive guy, still maybe a candidate for the Selke Trophy. He just keeps on rolling on at 37. If he has a good season this year, at the end of the year, I might joke with him, man, maybe one more year on top of the last 2 he's got. But he's ready to go. He's put up his beautiful house in Manhattan Beach up for sale, so with an eye towards the future. But I don't, people expect regression, but I just don't see it. Like, he's healthy. He still has his IQ is off the chart. So it's been great to get to know this player. More importantly, get to see him play this long as a one team athlete, which in sports, Rob, you see very rarely now. So to see him retire a King, well, like Dustin Brown did before him, that's going to be a great thing to see.
Yeah. What's left on his deal?
2 years. He's under 2-year extension at $7 million per. So this season and next season, he's here, and then he's going to hand it off and ride off to the sunset and probably go back to his home in Slovenia on the lake and enjoy life after that.
Okay. So speaking of potential regression, Drew Doughty, 11 million for 3 more years.
Yeah. Yeah. But 15 goals last year, Rob, which I think he hasn't gotten that total for 4 or 5 years. He had a great season. He's produced like 50 points.
He's like a kid.
He's passionate. Like and look, Rob, he's played for like 16, but he's 34 years old. Yeah. He's not that old. There's still gas. Look, if Brent Burns can play till he's 40, and granted, Drew's not in the same shape that Brent is, but he's just a savant. He's just a natural. He's a natural. He wants to play. And I can't envision what Drew would do after hockey because he loves hockey so much. He's almost passionate about it. So, but can he get 15 goals again? Maybe you're asking a little bit. Could he hit double figures? Yeah. He worked on his slap shot. It's more accurate because his shot was not very accurate over the years. He worked on his accuracy, and that's what happens when you get to this level and you get this long in the tooth with respect to playing. You're still working on stuff. He certainly worked on a shot last year. It paid off in dividends. Like I said, much more accurate shot. So maybe a little regression on the point total, but he's still going to play 25 minutes a night. He's probably going to be top 5 in time on ice with respect to players in the NHL. And he's still a very passionate player. The only concern I have really isn't about his play. It's like, if they don't win again in the playoffs, I remember like 3-4 years ago when they were going through the rebuild, at the exit interviews, Drew said, not getting in the playoffs is getting old.
Yeah.
Well, not winning in the playoffs is getting old now. And if they go down a fourth consecutive season, either not making the playoffs this year or not winning, then is Drew the kind of guy that might look for greener pastures? Kopitar won't, but Drew is so passionate about winning. I'm not saying Anze isn't. Like, there will all be that conjecture, oh, Drew wants to go home and play. I don't buy that. But I think with respect to him, I don't expect regression on the ice with respect to performance. I do concern myself about his status in LA if they were not to win again in the playoffs this season, because this kid's all about winning, always has been.
Yeah. Love the guy. I've had some great conversations with him over the years. He's always a lot of fun.
Oh, he's the best. He's great.
Um, you raised it. Do they make it? Are they in or are they out?
When you look at the teams that are outside looking in, the only team I'd like give a legitimate shot to bounce all the way back would be in the West would be St. Louis. So the
Okay.
question is, are they better than St. Louis? I
Right.
think they are. Could they regression point total? You mentioned 99, 104, 99 the last 3 years. They could. They could go to 95. So I think they're an 80-point team, 500. I don't, because I still think that the core is there. Look, almost every game except for maybe playing Edmonton, they're going to go to a game with advantage in the middle. If they're all healthy, you've got Kopitar, you've got Deneau, and you've got Byfield. Very few teams can, as great as Nashville did in the offseason, getting Stammer and Marchessault. Like, they're down the middle with O'Reilly, Novak, and Sissons. That's an advantage for LA. So a lot of nights they'll have an advantage on the blue line. If their defense, if they come close to how they played defensively, fine. And I mentioned they had six players left last season, and that's a lot. And you figured, okay, there's a lot of offense coming out of that. Well, one was the goaltender in Talbot to replace Kemper. They only lost 46 goals if you combine the other five players, and one of them was Dubois. So if you think that, the guy's coming in like a Fogel, if LaFerriere can get the 20 goals, he'll be on the top line. They should be better offensively. And I don't think people have really looked at that closely, that they didn't lose much offensively, and they lost $8.5 million cap hit, and a guy who was certainly questionable with respect to how he played and how hard he played. So there's opportunity. While they may take a regression with respect to, if you think that Kemper's not as good as Talbot, and there may be some regression there, and maybe, Edmondson's too slow to play, or the style doesn't fit the team, that's slipping from the 1-3-1. But I think they'll be better offensively, have opportunity to be offensively, and they're a little worse defensively and a little better offensively. You're coming in at about 95 to 100 points. I don't think they'll win the division. I still don't think they're a three-round threat. But I think the expectation is that if you're a Kings fan in October, save some money for playoff tickets, they should be there. I think they're in the top 8, because I don't think St. Louis is done. And every team behind St. Louis, like Utah, which really has no excuse now, because you can't complain about the building or the owner or playing on the wrong side of town. They should progress, but Calgary's in a rebuild. San Jose, they've got 2 stellar kids coming in, but that's a very, very young team. Anaheim isn't ready to make the jump yet. I don't see any, and Seattle, I think, will improve, but not to the extent where they're going to improve 20 points. So I think it's not more about the Kings. It's about the teams behind them that haven't really progressed that much. So I think they're a safe bet to get in there. One thing they should do is find a place to land in the top 8 where they don't face Edmonton in the first round, Rob.
Right.
That's what you should do. If it comes down to game 82 and you have a chance to either play Edmonton or to play another team, if you lose, I would be fielding my AHL teams, because it just doesn't work against Edmonton. It hasn't worked. It's the bane of their existence in the playoffs. And so while I think they're a top 8 team, again, do I think they're a Stanley Cup contender? No. And I think the big question is, and the pressure that's on this organization is to win in the playoffs, even if it's just one round, because then you could say there's progression, because now that and I'm going to insult one team here, Rob. They've turned into the Minnesota Wild. Right. Minnesota Wild's a really good team that makes the playoffs, and guess what? Nobody's afraid to play them, because you probably beat them, and that's what they've turned into. So if they've plateaued here. They've made the playoffs, which I mentioned is hard to do, but they've had no playoff success with respect to fans who still remember 2012 and 2014. And they haven't won a playoff round in 10 years, in a decade. Since Jazz Hands came out, that's the last time they won a playoff round, in 2014. And there's got to be pressure on the organization, and especially Rob Blake, to get it done this season. He's got more than he's got, for a guy that hasn't had a track record of winning, and you mentioned 0 for 5 in the playoffs, and he was here in 19 or in 17 when Vegas swept them, even though that was Dean Lombardi's team. There's pressure to get playoff success. I think that's the measure of this team is going to be playoff success. I think they get in. You'll have to talk to me in April when I see the matchup of who they're playing with respect to the chances in the playoffs. But I don't think they're a danger to get to a cup final at this point.
Right. All right. Well, you just you just hit the home run and banged it out there at the end, Dennis. So,
No
by the way,
problem.
and you brought up Utah, Matt McConnell, who's the that we talked about we're going to talk about the exact thing that you brought up, the
Yeah.
excuses and the fact that they finally are out of the muck that
Yeah.
they were in, and they're in a
Yep.
new situation. And we'll go through that team and let people know what the hell's going on with Utah. Matt McConnell, 13 years, the play-by-play voice on
Yeah.
television
Great guy.
down there in Arizona, and he headed north. So good stuff there, and great stuff with you, Dennis, as always. I've been chatting with Pags a little bit, and it's always fun to check out the fourth period stuff you guys have put together, and we'll have folks looking for you on Sirius XM as well. And also, give us the exact coordinates on your LA Kings podcast so
Yeah,
people.
it's called Kings of the Podcast with John Hoven. You can find us on Twitter at Kings of the Pod, and you can go on all the major platforms. Even actually, it's actually on the Kings app. If you go to LA Kings app and you click on podcast, you'll see Jesse Cohen's, you'll see ours. So it's called Kings of the Podcast. It's primarily LA Kings stuff, but we do call NHL, and we had actually Pags on last week to talk going around the NHL. But it's a King centric podcast that we do pretty regularly. Once the season starts, probably weekly or every 10 days or so. So that's where you can find us, Rob.